Welcome to Equine Assisted World. I'm your host, Rupert Isaacson, New York Times bestselling author of The Horse Boy, The Long Ride Home and The Healing Land. Before I jump in with today's guest, I just want to say a huge thank you to you, our audience, for helping to make this happen. I have a request. If you like what we do, please like, subscribe, tell a friend. It really helps us get this work done. As you might know from my books, I'm an autism dad. And over the last 20 years, we've developed several equine-assisted, neuroscience-backed certification programs. If you'd like to find out more about them, go to newtrailslearning.com. So without further ado, let's meet today's guest. Welcome back to Equine Assisted World. I've got a power duo with me today. I don't know whether to go with Mark first or Chrissy first. So I've got Mark Rashid, because he's to that side of me, and I got Crissi McDonald, who they're actually in the same house but in separate rooms, and they do extremely interesting things with both equine and human well-being that it's handy to be aware of if you're going to be in these fields. So they're coming to us from Estes Park in Colorado, which is just north of Boulder, near Rocky Mountain National Park. Lucky people. And they, like I say, do extraordinary things, but I think they need to tell us these extraordinary things. So, Mark and Chrissy, thank you so very much for coming on. Would you please introduce yourselves and
awesome.
Tell us what you do? Chrissy, ladies first. You want to kick off first?
Sure. The short version is I'm an author, a photographer, and a clinician. So I spend the majority of my time teaching, helping horses and people communicate more clearly. And Mark and I teach primarily about softness, and softness as an internal attribute rather than thinking about soft hands or soft whatever in your body. Instead of it being external, we like to explore what does it mean to be internally soft. So that's the majority of our work, and that is something we practice whether we're teaching or not. And I will let Mark talk now. Excuse the dog.
That's no way to talk about your husband. Couldn't help it, sorry.
He wasn't talking yet.
You get used to it after a while. It's okay.
Yeah, fatalism.
Yeah, I mean, I've been working with horses, cleaning up after them for sure, since I was about 10. And I got really lucky in that the person who I started learning from at a very early age was very focused on the well-being of the horse, regardless of what you were doing with it. And so that was my kind of jumping off point from there. And I was pretty shocked the first time that I saw somebody hitting a horse, and because I had never seen that before. And so I had this foundation of kindness, if you will, when it came to horses, but also being effective in your work with horses and being able to be kind and effective. And kindness isn't always just, kind of letting the horse do whatever. There are boundaries that need to be set and parameters, but they can be done in such a way to where the horse can understand what it is that you're doing. And so that was my jumping off point. And as I started going out and working with horses on my own, I have to backtrack just a little bit and say that Walter was the person's name who I worked with when I was a kid. And his place, not just the work that he did with horses, but his place in general. When you walked onto his place, it was basically just him and I working together. And it had a certain feel to it. He had a certain feel to him, and his place had a certain feel. And so when I went out on my own, I know now that what I was feeling was there was a kindness and a humanity to what he was doing and who he was and how he did things. But I didn't know that then. And when I started to work on my own, I tried to find a way to develop that feel in the work that I was doing and with the horses and with the people that I was working with. And primarily I emulated what I saw with him initially. And I couldn't actually develop the feel that permeated his, working with him, because I didn't really know what I was looking for. So I was sort of mechanically going through the motions, and I tried to, back in the 1980s of the last century, there were a lot of clinicians coming out in the early to mid 1980s, and not a lot, but some, and they were saying things that sounded a lot like what Walter would say. And so I would go see these people, and what they were saying sounded like what he was saying, but what they were doing was not what he was doing. And it was very difficult for me for a long time, but eventually it led me into the world of martial arts, Aikido in particular. And that's where I started to see and feel what I had seen and felt with Walter back in the day. The internal aspect of what was going on is funny, because I found it, I didn't find it in the horse world, I found it in the martial arts world. And then I was able to then cross over and bring it into my work with horses. And
the work with horses that you were doing, this is Western, I'm presuming.
No, it's all.
Where was this?
Here in Colorado.
Okay. But was it primarily starting young horses, or was it helping people across disciplines? Like, were you a jumping coach? Specifically, what was your work at that stage mostly predicated around?
It was all disciplines.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, from driving, I've been a teamster back since I was a young kid. We actually raised draft horses for quite a while, 4 or 5 years. We raised draft horses, started them. My great-great-grandfather actually brought the first Clydesdales into America from Scotland. So, yeah, so it's pretty much any discipline. We work off of principles, and so rather than technique is important, but if you work with principles, then the principles can cross over into any discipline.
Sure.
And horses are horses. So, it's not a mystery.
And yet it's a great mystery, like people.
Indeed, right?
I guess the question, though, is usually, depending on people's geographic location and the culture that they come out of, they tend to gravitate more to one area of the equine world than the other. I know that Colorado stands at the crossroads, so you kind of get everything there. But you do have a very strong working ranch tradition there. At the same time, up and down the front ranges of the Rockies, you've got all of the equestrian FEI disciplines you expect to find, and many other things as well. And it's very interesting that you have the driving background. I want to return to that in a minute. When your mentor Walter was working, what was he primarily doing with horses? What were people mostly coming to him for? And then when you went out on your own, were you kind of setting out to do the same thing?
People didn't actually come to him. What he did was he went out and bought horses, whether from private sellers or sales. He would buy these horses, and then we basically worked with them. He actually had a stock contractor buddy for rodeo. And so early on, he would put me on these horses to see if they would buck good. And if they bucked,
days before helmets and release forms.
and if they bucked good, then he would sell them to this buddy of his who was a stock contractor. And then if they didn't buck good, then we worked with them. And basically that's what it was. It was just him and I most of the time. And we, so if he was talking, I figured he was talking to me. And if I was talking, I guess he figured I was talking to him. But that's basically what it was. And he would buy and sell. Some folks might say these days that he rescued horses, but I don't believe that's how he saw it. It was just a way for him to make a living. He was an old hard scrabble rancher and making a living with horses, and that's what he did.
And was he, when he was effectively rehabbing these horses as they came in, were they going out to all disciplines, or were they primarily going out to the ranching world? What were they in general being prepared to do?
I don't know. Remember, I was pretty young at the time.
Mm-hmm.
So,
but he wasn't, for example, having you work over poles and cavalettis to turn them into jumping horses, or
it would be branches and down trees, and
Okay.
it wasn't anything official, if you want
and
to
you'd
call
be
it that.
using Western and English tack for this. You'd be
Mostly Western.
okay.
In fact, all it was either Western or bareback.
Okay.
Yep.
But then from there, the horse could go out to any type of
Yeah.
home. Got it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And if you would say, apart from his internal softness and kindness, if he had a system that you could, in retrospect, look back on, could you outline it?
I couldn't tell you that there was a system because everything was different. I don't recall him doing the same thing with a whole bunch of horses ever. He took the horse, and whatever it was that the horse needed, that's what he did. So there wasn't any sort of program, if you want to call it that, or a system.
Mm-hmm.
He truly worked with the horse as an individual. And that was one of the things that really stuck with me when I would start seeing some of these other trainers later on in life, where everything was so regimented. And if the horse didn't fit or didn't respond, then the trainer just did more of it, or did it bigger or harder or whatever. And that just wasn't, that was, again, so foreign to me that it kind of didn't make sense to me. And to be honest, it doesn't make that much sense to me even today. So there, if you want to say if you want to call it a system, his system was to not have a system.
Right, or at least to recognize the individuality of each horse.
Exactly.
And follow it.
Exactly.
I'd like to return to this in a minute. I just want to go to Chrissy with a couple of questions here, but we all know that systems also can be very useful. So, for example, if I'm wanting to play guitar, I don't play it as well as you do, Mark, but that I can do a certain amount with self-teaching, but I do know that it's very, very helpful to sit down with somebody and have them show me scales and arpeggios, because it will help me to order and then go off on my own again, and then they show me something else that I can order. And so this interplay of this, say, healthy tension between systems and individuality, autonomy and connectedness, I think is a reality, but as you say, sometimes it's so overdone that one can dominate the other to the detriment of the whole. And so I'd like to go into that, because I think it's important for people to have maps to get around with. They are helpful. And at the same time, you don't want to stifle your creativity of finding your own way over the mountain, but it does help to know there's a mountain there, sort of thing. Mm-hmm. So perhaps, and martial arts obviously do have systems. So if we could just go into that paradox a little bit later, I'd love to, because I think this is a question that's in a lot of people's minds of how does one strike that balance, if you know what I mean. So Chrissy, how did you begin with all of this? And again, you're not just with horses, you're an artist, you're a photographer, you're an author, you're in the humanities. Right. So give us how you started and more or less where you're at now, what the mission is.
Well, I was born into a family who lived in town. No one in my family likes horses.
What town was that?
This is in Arizona. It's called Flagstaff.
Okay.
And they don't dislike horses, but it was like, when I was young, it was like, well, of course she likes horses because every kid likes horses. And so I would clean stalls in exchange for lessons. I would groom horses. I would clean out horse trailers. I would babysit. I did all these different things to get time with horses because I didn't have one. I lived in town. And then when I was in my early 20s, I was the director of the riding program at a Girl Scout camp. And then shortly after that, up until that time, I'd been riding other people's horses and basically exercising and grooming. It was, I wouldn't call what I was doing training so much as just keeping the horse engaged. And I've always loved horses. And I didn't fall into, but I had a friend who had horses, and she came from the background of German martingales and tie downs and spurs and crops and whips. And if you tell the horse to do something, they better by God do it. And here I come from the background of grooming horses and hopping on bareback and riding in the cinder hills and, just doing whatever, falling off and climbing back up on a log to get on the horse. And I rode standardbreds and quarter horses and Arabs. And it didn't matter. If it was a horse, I was happy. And so I got into this world of it was very strict and very hard. But I didn't know. I thought this was what I thought once you started getting serious with horses, that you had to be this way. But I never liked it. And so I got my own horses. I started teaching lessons, started out with kids. So anywhere from 5 years to 14 years, did a lot of kid lessons, and then moved into training. I was very dissatisfied with what I knew because it seemed very mechanical and unforgiving. And, the horses always did it, but I didn't like how it felt. I didn't like how it felt to me, and I didn't like how it looked. And so I started looking for alternative ways. This was in the late 90s. So this is when a bunch of clinicians came out, and I ended up studying with John Lyons a little bit, which was very educational at that time, going from the world I was in to what he was doing, which is more like conditioned response stuff. It was revolutionary. But even that, when I started applying some of those techniques to my own horsemanship, inside of me, I was like, this isn't enough. That there must be someone or something out there who knows something that I don't even know I don't know.
Right.
And so I asked a friend of mine because she'd ridden with, at that time, she'd probably ridden with 50 different clinicians, everyone from really well-known to local. And she mentioned Mark's name. And she said, he has a clinic in 2 months. I said, great, sign me up. I didn't know who Mark was. At that time, he had 3 or 4 books out. She said, here's a book. I was considering the horse. So I took the book home and I read it. And I'm like, oh, this guy sounds pretty cool. And so I went to do a clinic, and it was a 4-day clinic, and I didn't have a saddle that fit my horse. So I rode in bareback. And, I'm a trainer at that point, and I'm thinking, oh, this will, we won't need to do much because I'm a trainer and I've trained my horse. I think I was still in my 20s. And after 4 days, I remember having the distinct feeling that I knew nothing. And that wasn't a bad thing. I was really excited by the fact that even though I didn't know what was going on, I knew how I felt and how my horse felt doing this work that centered on softness. I knew that was the direction I wanted to go.
I could quip that, and then he was so expensive that you figured, well, actually, I better marry him, and then I can afford to keep the learning going, right?
Yeah. It cuts down on my costs, definitely.
One has to be practical about these things.
That's right.
So, Mark, consider the horse. So, Chrissy comes along. She's searching, and she's finding things that are effective, but it's not sitting with her. Talk to us about Consider the Horse. What's in that book? What motivated you to write that book? What do you hope people get from that book?
The question it's a really interesting question because it wasn't my choice to write that book. I was asked to write it. And
go on. By who?
By the guy who actually turned out to be my editor. So I was teaching horse training at the time. We were using Mustangs for that. And I had a little school. This is before I started doing clinics. And I was doing a little school, and we used Mustangs to teach people how to train and work with horses. And there was a woman in the class, and she said, my husband has a horse, and he's not getting along with it, and we would like to sell him, and could you come by and just kind of tell us what this horse might be worth? So I went over, and you couldn't catch the horse, so we worked on that for a little while. Once you got him caught, you couldn't saddle him, you couldn't brush him. So we worked on that for a little while. Once you got him saddled, you couldn't get on. Once you got on, you couldn't go. Once you got him to go, you couldn't stop. So we worked on all of that stuff for, I don't know, maybe 45 minutes. And by the time he wasn't a troubled horse or bad horse. He had just been getting releases for things that they didn't want him to do. And so it's just a complete misunderstanding. And he didn't like the way he felt, and the owners didn't like the way they felt. And it didn't take hardly any time, just by showing the horse that, here's the thing that we're looking for you to do. And he would go, oh, okay, well, then I'll just do that. So anyway, I had actually written some articles for Western Horseman magazine, and by that time. And so her husband, his name was Scott, and he said, have you ever thought about writing a book about what you do? And I said, no, I haven't given it any thought to do that. And he said, well, if you ever want to write a book, let me know, because I can help. And I was thinking, well, what do you got, a typewriter or what? But it turns out that he was an editor for this publishing company, Johnson Books. And a couple weeks later, he called me up and he said, have you given any more thought to that book? And I said, I haven't given any thought to it, and so we sat down and worked it out. That night, we were on the phone for a couple hours. He went down the next day and pitched it to the publishing company, and they bought it. So I just wanted to write a book that the idea was I wanted it to read like a James Herriot book, and I wanted it to look like a Will James book. Will James was a cowboy back in the 1930s who was also an author and illustrator. And so that's how it came to be. So, and it was just about working with troubled horses, which is basically what I had been doing up to that point, primarily. It's just lots and lots and lots of troubled horses. So that's what the book was about. And
Chrissy, sorry, you go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Oh no, I was just going to say that I didn't think it was going to be a big deal, and they actually didn't want it. The marketing guy, after I'd started writing the book, he went and looked at the best-selling horse books on the market, and they were all how-to books, and mine wasn't that, or even close. He didn't think he'd be able to sell it, and so long story short, they published it, and I think they only did like 3,000 copies, and they sent it out to a few to get some reviews. And the first review was from a big Time magazine here in the States, and it was the thing that they said in the review was that I was a Colorado clone of James Herriot, and the book took off.
So you hit the spot there,
I guess, and right now it's sold over 1.5 million copies worldwide.
Good Lord.
So yeah, who knew?
Well done. Hats off. And Chrissy, when you read that book, what made you think, yeah, I need to go and learn from this person?
Well, I was already signed up for the clinic, so I'd already paid my money.
That helped.
Yeah. When I read the book, it struck me, because I had been reading horse books, and they were all how-to books. If you want the horse to do A, you have to do B and C. If the horse does D, you do F. And they had great illustrations, and it was mostly, how to get the horses to do stuff, which it's not a bad thing, but it was very engaging for the part of my brain that likes systems. So we were talking about systems earlier.
Mm-hmm.
When I read Mark's book, it was all stories. And so the feeling I got from those had nothing to do with my brain. It was in my body. I was thinking, I've never thought of that. And that seems so much kinder, or that seems so much more easy to understand than A, B, C, D, E, F, G,
There's a couple of examples. Are there a couple of stories that really leapt out at you, if you could just summarize them, that probably stick in your head? Like that you thought, oh, yeah, gosh, yes.
One of them that I remember is Mark has a story about catching a horse. And I'm not going to try and quote it, but it was at that time, catching horses was basically about, if the horse wants to run, you make them run until they don't want to run anymore. And so that's what I had learned, is you get in a round pen. If the horse doesn't want to be caught, we go around, and then the horse will get tired, and then you can catch
That's
him.
assuming you can even get the horse into the round pen in the first place.
Yes. Yes. Thankfully, I was blessed to have horses that actually went with me into the round pen, or there was a large corral or something. But when I was doing that, it was so disconnected. I would do it, and I could get the job done, except for a couple horses, which is why I went searching.
Yeah.
But Mark talked about just moving, instead of driving the horse, run. Oh, if you want to run, by God, we're going to run. Instead of doing that, is going with the horse as they move, so that you're more doing something in connection. And that, that really struck me, is because up until this time, I had been immersed in kind of a dominance version of horsemanship.
Right.
I say you do. And that was the story that cracked open the door to, oh, this could actually be something we do together, that both of us end up feeling better by the end, instead of one of us is out of breath and the other feels crummy, like, oh, I made another being do what I wanted, which it's not me. I'm not going to say whether it's good or bad. It's just not me. And so that was the first story I remember thinking, oh, there's a way to do something with a horse, and have them feel good about being in your company, as opposed to, yes, sir. So I think that was the first one.
When you then began to work together, I imagine that the volume of horses that were and people that were suddenly coming in front of you probably accelerated a bit. You've got the success of the book. Now you're a team. You can do more. People have heard of you. So now stuff starts to happen, and you learn a lot more, right? Because all these different contexts, human and equine. What would you say in those early years where you began to work together were the things that most leapt out at you as a team, as a pair, to go, oh, we see this over and over again? And then also, what patterns did you begin to evolve together that you could now look back on and say, right, yes, that was sort of the time we actually kind of evolved this approach or this framework in response to these things? Just talk us through that a little bit, because it's going to inform, I think, the later questions, which is about things that people are facing now, who are listening, particularly in their equine assisted programs, and how we can open up more options. So just what were the patterns that you saw that people seem to consistently need over and over again, and what did you see were the patterns of the responses that you guys ended up evolving?
If you don't mind, I'll start. Mark's got himself muted, so I'll just start anyway.
Maybe on purpose, I don't know. She's wise.
So when I started working with Mark, I had gone from a trainer who saw, I'm going to say, 30 to 40 horses and clients a year. And that included colt starting, riding, trailer loading. It was everything. From maybe 30 or 40 people a year to, I'm going to say, between 400 and 500. And then if we went to a trade show or like Equitana or Equine Affair, that jumped into thousands. And so me personally, the first year that I started working, we started doing clinics. We were on the road 250, 260 days a year. We were doing 42 clinics a year. Me personally, I was in overwhelm because of the amount of horses and people we were seeing. And my own learning curve went straight up, just like a rocket. So for me personally, what I relied on a lot was teaching. But then at the end of the day, being able to go to Mark and say, okay, I saw this thing and it felt like this needed to happen. So I showed them this and it mostly worked, but I feel like I'm missing something. And Mark will have already worked with that person. What we used to do is he would work with the person. They would come to me and they would have an extra hour to kind of solidify their learning. We only saw 8 people a day, and that was a 4-day clinic in the beginning. So, at first I was reliant on the fact that he had been clinicking a lot longer than I had. I had gone from mostly backyard horse people to all disciplines. And I was familiar with all disciplines. And like Mark said, the principles, it doesn't matter what saddle they're working in, the principles are the same. So yeah, for me, I would say initially it was the ability to take what I saw and run it by Mark, who'd had at that point thousands more horses and people under his belt than I had. And also just really enjoy being able to go back and forth across the country and see so many horses and people. It was just a crash course in how to recognize certain things, and if you're in long enough and you see enough, patterns do start to emerge.
Right.
And it's not that you're designing your teaching to the pattern, but you go, oh, okay, here's a pattern I've seen before. Here's what worked in the past. Let's try this. And if it doesn't work, you try something else. But that was my impression. So I think, and then as we've started the clinics, especially the 10-day clinics, I think we rely on each other a lot for impressions of, how to help a horse and a person best. It's different every time, as you know, Rupert, as well. You can teach the same thing every time, but the person and the horse are different, and it makes that teaching just a little bit different every time. So that's been very valuable, is to develop a flexibility in my own teaching instead of just, do ABC.
Right.
There's a part of me that really likes those kind of systems because then I don't have to think, but it's not creative and it's not personalized.
But those patterns that were showing up, were there consistent issues, dilemmas that people and horses were showing up together? And what would you say the ones that just leap into your mind straight away? Yeah, we had a bunch of people and it was this.
For a while, we had a bunch of people with Premarin horses. And for people who aren't familiar with Premarin horses, those are the offspring of mares that they use. They use mare's urine to make hormone replacement therapy for women. It's called Premarin. I don't know how prevalent it is now. Yeah. So we were seeing at the time, and then there was this movement to adopt the babies out.
Mm-hmm.
So because the babies were just like an after effect. They just needed the urine. So we saw a lot of Premarin horses for a number of years. And it was really interesting because for a while we'd see horses who had been diagnosed with EPM. And then for a while we saw horses who had been barefoot but maybe needed shoes. And then we saw Premarin horses. And then now we seem to be in a stretch where we're seeing a fair amount of Mustangs. So things go in waves.
Right, but what were the dilemmas that these Premarin horses were bringing? And I'm going to ask you about
ask Mark about that too. A lot of them were, because they don't have papers, you can't verify, but a lot of them seem to be inbred and unable to learn. So the most common thing is people saying, I show my horse this thing, we do it for a week, and I think I'm doing it in a way that he's learning. And then I'll go back the next day and it's like he's never done it.
Almost like autism in horses.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I'll let Mark pick it up from there.
Yeah, please do, Mark. Talk to us about this.
Well, back in the 80s, I had read a book on dogs that had been inbred, and they carried certain behaviors with them, and also physical traits as well. And I had seen some horses with similar behaviors and physical traits, balance issues, and a variety of things. And so I just started asking people about if the horse was registered, and if it was, we would look at the papers, and sure enough, we would see either inbreeding or line breeding. And the most common is kind of the textbook is horses that are unable to retain information. So that's one of the big ones.
Interesting. Okay.
From behavioral issues, really horses that seem really, really frustrated, defensive horses that are defensive. Some horses are very aggressive, not to other horses necessarily, but to people.
Mm.
So there's a whole list of things and behaviors that they will exhibit. And, we're working with Dr. Steve Peters a lot here in the last 7 years. And I talked with him at length about this, and there's a ton of research on it now. And one of the interesting things about inbred horses is that depending on how they are managed early on will determine whether or not those genes get turned on or off. And so there are some inbred horses out there that are world champions, reiners or jumpers or whatever. And then there's others that you can't lead out of the pen, that literally will spook at their own shadow. And we have an inbred horse here who's a great horse, great trail horse. But he's pretty quirky. And our granddaughter rides him. And he's a great, really super nice horse. But he's a little quirky, But the way he was handled early on, those genes didn't turn on. That caused all the major issues. Now, he does have some balance issues, and he can't canter. And that's, as these guys get older, those are some of the things that start happening you start seeing balance issues, you start seeing lack of wanting to go past a gate that they're comfortable in. And Chrissy worked on seeing if she couldn't get him to canter for a couple of years. He did initially, and then eventually he just couldn't do it anymore. So we
almost like a kind of dementia.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when a horse presents to you with this kind of almost like autism-like symptoms associated with this inbreeding, what do you do?
Depends on the severity.
No doubt, but in general.
If the horse is unable to retain information, then we usually recommend that they just become a pasture ornament. Just turn them out in pasture if they can, or find a rescue that can take them. Because as long as you allow them to be a horse, they're fine. It's when we start to interact with them, when humans start to ask them to do things other than just being a horse.
When you add monkey stuff, right? Yeah.
That's when they really start to struggle.
Interesting.
And as far as being a riding horse, they can potentially be dangerous.
Yeah, sure.
Not because they're going to be dangerous as an animal. It's just that their behavior is going to be unpredictable. And so it's really
Let's say it's not that extreme though, and someone's just, the horse is clearly struggling, but it seems that there's some possibilities for some potential. How do you go about helping the horse to retain information?
If they can't retain it, they can't retain it. So it's not like you can fix that.
You can't build neuroplasticity in the horse?
No. So it's just the way it is.
But you can in people, so why not in horses?
I don't know. You'd have to ask a neurologist about that.
I think we need to go back to Dr. Stephen Peters, because it's it's intriguing to me, because
can I throw something in, Rupert?
Yeah, please do.
So this horse that we have, His name is Banjo. And I rode him in clinics for 5 or 6 summers. And when we got him, he didn't know his lateral work. So turn on the haunches, turn on the forehand, back up. He didn't know any of that. I worked on that consistently for 4 years. And every summer I had to start at the beginning.
Mm.
So when this compares to our other horses who I've spent just as much time with, one of them I hadn't ridden in 2 years. I got on her and she had all her moves. Turn on the forehand, turn on the haunches, side pass, back up. Very soft, no trouble. But Banjo, every summer I had to say, okay, this means turn on the forehand. This means turn on the haunches. And he could retain it as long as we were doing it.
Okay.
But it was always, there was never any graduation in skill level.
Okay.
So it was always as though it was the first time he was ever doing it. And then the next summer would come around and I'd have to do it again. And knowing that he's inbred, it didn't, I just thought, well, we're meeting now his capacity to do this skill. If you want to go down a trail, he's great. Go over a log, he stops great. He's like a goat. He'll go anywhere. But if you want refined work, that's his ceiling. So I just expect that.
And you work within his parameters. Yeah.
Yes.
This is interesting to me. Do you think there's a lot of people out there working with inbred horses who don't know that they are?
We see.
Yes.
I wouldn't say we see one a clinic, but we see a bunch of them. We see a bunch of them.
If you're in the equine assisted field, or if you're considering a career in the equine assisted field, you might want to consider taking one of our 3 neuroscience-backed equine assisted programs. Horseboy Method, now established for 20 years, is the original equine assisted program specifically designed for autism, mentored by and developed in conjunction with Dr. Temple Grandin and many other neuroscientists. We work in the saddle with younger children, helping them create oxytocin in their bodies and neuroplasticity in the brain. It works incredibly well. It's now in about 40 countries. Check it out. If you're working without horses, you might want to look at movement method, which gets a very, very similar effect, but can also be applied in schools, in homes. If you're working with families, you can give them really tangible exercises to do at home that will create neuroplasticity when they're not with you. Finally, we have taquine equine integration. If you know anything about our programs, you know that we need a really high standard of horsemanship in order to create the oxytocin in the body of the person that we're working with, child or adult. So this means we need to train a horse in collection, but this also has a really beneficial effect on the horse's well-being. And it also ends your time conflict where you're wondering, oh my gosh, how am I going to condition my horses and maintain them and give them what they need, as well as serving my clients? Taquine equine integration, aimed at a more adult client base, absolutely gives you this. Do you think it's on the increase or decrease or stable?
That's a good question. I would say that I've seen probably more.
Okay.
In the last 5-6 years.
What do you attribute that to?
Backyard breeding.
But people have always backyard bred, so yeah, why now? Or do you think there's just more of it, or the backyard breeding?
I don't know. I just don't know. I mean, it could be a lot of pasture breeding. We've seen a lot of rescue horses that were brought in, and they were turned out, early on with, brothers and sisters and mothers and sons. And so you get a lot of that kind of thing.
Right, because there's no new stallion coming in. And
right. And we're seeing a lot of it
right.
in the Mustang world as well.
Well, that was going to be my next question. Okay. This is intriguing to me. And I've actually got a horse that I'm working with right now who I'm been suspecting this of. I'm working actually at a distance, but the horse seems impossibly spooky,
Mm-hmm.
given all the good training and conditioning he gets, and I know he does. I don't actually train him hands on myself. It's just a long distance thing I'm doing, but I know the person and I know everything that they're doing is great. And the horse spooks and bolts out of the blue consistently, and then you can recondition him. Say, okay, oh, it's this thing that you were afraid of. Let's go and look at this. And then oh yeah, that's great. Okay. And then 3-4 months go by and he'll do it again as if he hadn't ever seen that thing. And in a way that is so sort of genuine that he's not just messing with you.
Mm-hmm.
And I was, in my mind, I was going, and then I found out that he's from a very particular herd, which has a very particular gene pool. But then I was thinking, but could it be inbreeding? Because you've still always got some stallions going to wander over the hill, right? And, introduce something new. So why do you think this shows up in stallions, given that in Mustangs, given that they have access to outside genetics?
Oh, that's the way they're gathered.
Go on.
Yeah. So what ends up happening is they pull in all of these families, and then they pull out what you might call the most desirable, and then they kick the rest out. And they may be turning brothers and sisters out, and fathers and daughters out. But we just worked with one last summer that here's a really good example. So this horse, they got this Mustang when he was, I think, a year and a half old. They got him, and the woman started him herself. And she had never started a horse before, and they worked together. She brought him when he was 3, I believe, to one of our clinics, and they were struggling with some basic stuff, but it wasn't anything major. We kind of got things lined out. She started riding him and doing some pretty cool stuff with him, going out camping with him and doing that kind of thing. And then she, all of a sudden, out of the blue, last year, I think, or the year before, he started bolting when she would get on. Or she'd be riding along and he would start to go a little faster on the trail, and pretty soon he would bolt. Just out of the blue. No rhyme or reason to it.
This pretty much describes the horse, that I'm talking about. Yeah.
So then what happened was she brought the horse to one of our instructors, and they started working together. And it took a long time, a year, to get him to where he wasn't bolting anymore off the mounting block. And he was still pretty quirky, just handling him, and, he would bite at people, and just out of the blue, just interesting, which, his owners said he had never done that before. But all of a sudden now he's exhibiting that kind of behavior. And anyway, so it looked like they had the mounting thing taken care of. And last summer, the owners came, and they were going to work with him. And the husband got on this horse, and he walked around. He was pretty okay. The very next day, he went to put his foot in the stirrup, and the horse bolted. And I had pretty much suspected before that this was an inbred situation. And so that was, and there were some other things, some other indicators as well. But the interesting thing was they had their dentist came in and did some work on his teeth. And she said, this is independently, that his mouth was indicative of a horse that was inbred because of the way the jaw was formed.
Okay.
So
what were the signs, out of interest? What do you remember what she pointed out? That
narrow jaw and deformation of some of the molars and some of the other teeth that aren't at the correct angle. That you really have to work to get them at the correct angle. But it's how how the teeth are growing, not that somebody did bad dental work.
Mm-hmm.
So
This is really revealing, and I guess this is why, going back to my question about why can't we get some neuroplasticity? But I think you sort of answered that one, Chrissy, by saying, well, some of them actually, yes, within certain parameters, like, okay, I might always have to start from scratch when it's the lateral work, but as a trail horse, okay. Or a more extreme version, as you're describing, and this horse that I have been dealing with lately, where it's now just dangerous. And if there's neuroplasticity, it seems to be fleeting. And then it might be good for a while, but you can never tell when it might reappear. The question that comes up in my mind, interesting, I had no idea the podcast was going to go this way, but I think anyone who's running equine programs really needs to be aware of this, particularly in the USA, because the horses come in from exactly these kinds of donation points, right? People often find horses that they can't quite work with, or
right,
whatever, or it was the horses from the urine thing that were often coming on the market. And I had a few of those when I was in the States, and some of them were grand, some of them were fantastic.
Yeah,
made great horses, and but I guess it was a bit of a crapshoot. But I was just thinking in my mind, well, in England we don't have that problem, and we have a lot of Mustangs. People always forget that. What are the English Mustangs? Every wild pony breed in the UK, and there's 12 or more of them, has a wild population that lives completely wild on the hill, including there's a certain amount of winter kill that, the Welsh ponies, the fell ponies, the Exmoors, the Dartmoors, the Highlands, the Dales, you name it. There's a wild population to these, the New Forests. And they do roundups. And of course they select what they want and send the rest back. But the way they muster them, you're right, is very different. They tend to pre-select more or less what they'd like to muster. And then they're not going to be turned out or held in pens where those family groups are going to end up somehow mating with each other. It's only a certain amount of them are brought in from the open hill that have been to some degree pre-selected, and it's an ancient practice. It goes back, well over 2,000 years or whatever. So people have certain commoners' rights to go and do that, and blah blah blah. So the whole thing is quite selective, and it sounds like what you're saying with the Mustangs is and perhaps with the Mustangs it was at a certain point like that, but it's become somewhat industrialized. And
yeah, I don't think it's intentional. It's not what they're doing isn't, I don't think, intentional.
Yeah.
The way that happens. I know a lot of folks in that program, and the people who actually gather, and contrary to popular belief, these people are really conscientious about trying not to hurt the horses. Now, there's people who would argue against that, but the people that I know that are involved in that program really do have the horse's best interest in mind. It just, the way that the program is set up, especially now, it's just so indiscriminate that that's kind of what happens.
Have you noticed this problem coming from any particular Mustang herds? Do any spring to mind?
No, it really is. It's pretty hit and miss. It really is. We've seen them from all over the West. You get some from this herd and they're great, and then the next year you get some from the same herd, and it's such a crapshoot.
Okay, yeah.
And
one of my best horses was a Mustang, but he started life exactly as you had described, uncatchable, on this, on that, but then turned out fantastic.
Pretty quick when they start making connections about what it is that we're asking and how they can do the thing, whether or not you're going to have a long-term problem or you're going to have a long-term horse that you can do some really nice work with.
The work that I do, obviously, with neuroplasticity in humans with horses, started with autism, but now it's more ubiquitous. I'm very much with you on this idea that you must follow the individual. So every program we have 3 main programs. It's predicated on follow the child, and so therefore follow the horse in the preparation of that has to happen. However, at the same time, we do need to be able to produce horses that have enough muscle on the top line to take an adult with a child together, if the child is young, that can collect, because with collection, the hip rocking for the human on top produces oxytocin. Oxytocin is communication. Communication is what we're after. And that was how my son, became verbal on the horse. And then we realized that was going on. So, oh gosh, okay, we could replicate that. And then the neuroplasticity came on top of that, the BDNF, the brain-derived neurotrophic factor. So we do have to actually work to a system. We work to a very, very old masters classical system of in-hand work to get the horse to really understand, before you ever get on his back, how to place those hind legs underneath, so it's just easy for them, so that by the time you do get up there, the horse kind of already knows. And then you have a person on the ground and a person on top, so the person on the ground does the thing the horse already knows, and then the person on top does the new thing, the rider's aid, and the horse kind of goes, oh, these two things mean the same thing. Oh, okay, that's cool, I accept. And you get this smooth learning curve. So we absolutely use a system that's very old, and at the same time, we're not ever going to not tweak that system depending on the individual horse in front of us. Similarly, with the way we're working with kids, we're going to set up the right environment with no, hopefully, bad sensory triggers, hopefully an arsehole-free environment so the kid isn't feeling threatened by humans, so we're not triggering the amygdala if possible, and then from there work on the sensory issues, and then from there to the back riding for the oxytocin, and then from there we just follow them wherever it goes. So we're always treading this line between system and anarchy. And that what we've realized is you absolutely need both. What I see a lot of in both the horse training and in the therapy world is extremism. So either rigidity in a system, whether it's with horses or humans, like behavioralism with humans could come under that as well, which involves quite a lot of coercion and fear, frankly. And nothing at all, which in some cases could work, but also won't in many cases, because the brain likes structure. And the same with horse people, that sometimes it's, as you said, Chrissy, very, very rigid, somewhat fear-based, training things that kind of get results, but not in a way that brings joy. And people then say, well, I'm going to throw all of that out the window. And then you get a horse that's kind of bored, unemployed. And one of the things that I found is often the biggest problem with horses that come to me when I'm wearing my horse training hat, or kids when I'm wearing my kid hat, is boredom. Often there's this kind of chronic just lack of purpose. And then you go see a good cow horse who absolutely knows what they're doing, and they're happy. Or a good hunting horse that really knows what it's doing, they're kind of happy. Or a very good therapy horse that really knows what it's doing, they're kind of happy. But the ones that are kind of, why am I here? What am I doing? And of course, within herds, there are structures. They're fluid. They're not rigid, but there are structures. Within human herds, there are structures. I've been lucky enough to live with hunters and gatherers. So but they're fluid. Talk to us about this, because it's so easy in these conversations to sound like one is coming down in one extreme or the other extreme, as if one is reacting to negative things. Does that make sense? Rather than looking for the eye of that paradox. How do you guys find the eye of that paradox between structure and anarchy? Do you want to lead with that one, Chrissy, and then we'll go to Mark?
Sure. The first thing that comes to mind is we see a lot of horses and a lot of people who are carrying muscle tension. So when we're taught to ride, especially if we're taught to ride traditionally, it's shoulders back, heels down, open your chest, stiffen your spine, right? That I had equitation lessons for years.
Yeah, equitation.
And then we do
that funny bump thing with your butt. Yeah.
Yeah. Stick out your butt, stick out your chest, right? Yeah. All these things, right? Well, what we're doing is we're asking the person to be stiff. And then if you add in a little fear, Now you have internal tension, external tension.
Mm.
Same thing with the horse. In our search to maybe create some structure for the horse, we actually build in tension. So inadvertently, we're telling the horse, in order to do this skill, let's say lower the head or go in collection, we have interpreted that, not in all cases, because I know people such as yourself are looking at something different. But in some cases, whether it's Western or English or whatever, we say, when you put your head down, I want you to tense all the muscles in your neck.
Yeah.
Okay. We inadvertently say that. We don't mean to make the horse tense. So I would say out of 10 people who come to a clinic, probably 8 of them and their horses, are carrying too much tension, muscle tension and internal tension. Okay. So there's
Emotional
a pattern.
tension. Yeah. Yeah. And you can't
Right.
separate the two. Yeah, it's true.
Right. So I've seen that pattern before. So with one person and horse, we might talk a lot about breathing because neither of them are breathing.
Mm.
With another person and horse, we might have to say, all right, let's just show you guys how to let go of tension, which means one of us will take the reins and hold the reins, and the rider will show us the tension they have on the reins. And then we can help the rider by saying, that's actually a lot. Can you cut that in half? Okay, now try relaxing your shoulders. We can walk them through. So there's the pattern: muscle tension, horse and rider; internal tension, horse and rider. But the way that we talk to each horse and rider is always different. We're not always going to say to we do say breathe to a lot of riders, but some horses may not need to be shown how to let go of tension.
Right.
The same way every other horse has, meaning we put our hands on the reins and we hold pressure until they give, right? That's the watered down, super simple version. It may be that the horse is carrying more internal tension than muscle tension. So how do we help that horse feel safe?
Mm.
That's different than helping a horse understand the skill of, when I feel pressure, I give to it. They're two different things, but they have the same presentation. Is that?
Yeah, makes perfect sense.
Yeah. I'll let Mark chime in.
I think a big part of what we do, and this also comes from my martial arts background, is that for me, the idea is to only use the amount of muscle you need to use in order to do the job you're asking your body to do. Same thing with the horse. Can we just use the muscle we need to use in order to do the job we're asking the horse to do? More times than not, going through our day, we often are using way more muscle than we need to use to do simple things, picking up the teacup off the table, or putting the cup back down on the table where you hear a kabang, or closing the door, or opening the door.
Right, and that could be informed by emotion as well, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And because we aren't aware that we're going through our life like that, and when it comes to working with horses, we go through our daily activities like a lumberjack, and then we want to be soft when we get to our horse, and it doesn't work that way. For me, it's about how do we help the individual become aware of maybe any physical or emotional tension that they're carrying, and then take that into their day. Take that softness or internal awareness, take it into their day where they could be practicing it 24 or 23 hours of the day, and then they can take it to their horse. Then riding with softness is easy when you're practicing it all day long in everything that you do. We had an instructor, one of our instructors, actually was at Chrissy's dojo, and he was retiring, and I think he had been training for 40 years, and he was going to retire as an instructor, and we were at his last class. And he said, been training for 40 years. I spent the first 10 years learning all the technique that I would need to know in order to do this, be an instructor. And I spent the last 30 years trying to figure out how not to use it. And that really stuck with me. And which is one of the reasons we focus so much on principles. Technique is really important. You got to have it, but at some point, the goal, at least for me, is how can I transcend that technique and do it in a more thoughtful, feel-based way to get the job done, whether it's with a person or whether it's with a horse.
Let's bring it to people. So when let's say we're doing horse boy method session, right? And person shows up, kid shows up, can be an adult. And we think we're going to work this way, perhaps with a horse. And the person very quickly shows they're not interested in the horse at all. So we immediately would then switch from horseboy method to what we call movement method. No problem. We just got a bazillion other things to do. So we have to be really, really obsessive about our horse preparation and willing to abandon the horse in 2 seconds if that's not where the person's at. And therefore, I need to know what that person's actually interested in. So I can prepare a little bit. If it's Mark Rashid coming, I know he likes Aikido. I don't know from Aikido. So I've got to get on Wikipedia and to have a conversation about Aikido. And be talking the language to some degree of Mark Rashid when he comes in, so that we could then maybe go somewhere from that. But what I'm really after is communication and neuroplasticity, whether it's coming with a horse or not. You guys are also working with many other things. So you're working with martial arts in particular, particularly Aikido. And it was intriguing to me back earlier in the podcast, you said, Mark, to find that softness, you had to go to the world of martial arts. So I haven't been in the world of martial arts like you've been in the world of martial arts, but I've been a bit in the world of martial arts myself. And I didn't always encounter softness there. So
not all martial arts are soft.
Right, exactly.
And Aikido doesn't have to be soft.
Well, exactly. Not all Aikido people I've met have been soft.
Right.
So, although more than others, I would say. But how was it that you, A, thought to go to martial arts to look for softness? That's interesting. Perhaps counterintuitive. And then B, how did you find that softness being able to be translated across to the horse thing? Because when people are doing the horse thing, as you were saying, Chrissy, people are a bit scared. You're up there, you're often being judged too, because you're, in a clinic or you're in a training situation. So there's a bit of fear in that, let alone the fear of falling off and getting killed. So, why did you think to go to the world of martial arts for softness? And then once having found that softness, how did you feel confident that you could bring that softness across to this slightly fearful situation with horses?
I didn't actually think about going to martial arts. One of my students suggested it.
Ah, okay. Why did they suggest it?
Well, I was working with a guy, so we get mostly women in our clinics. And I was doing a clinic in Tennessee, and we had one guy there who he was riding a Pasifino or a Peruvian, one or the other. And he was just having a heck of a time. This horse was trying as hard as he could to get along with what this guy was asking him to do, but there was so much conflict going on between the two of them. And finally, I just stopped him and I said, listen, everything that you want is here. It's right here. You've got all the energy, everything that you need, everything that you want is in this horse. All you have to do is blend with the energy and then give it some direction. And I said, I know it sounds like Zen horseback riding, but it's not. It's just about getting together with him so that the two of you are doing the same thing at the same time. Right now, your horse is doing one thing and you're doing something else. And how can we bring those two things together? Well, he was looking at me like I was an idiot or something, And because we don't
people often look at me that way. Yeah,
I know. I'm used to it, and that's how I noticed it to begin with, right? So, but because we don't get in very many men, I thought, man, I'm losing this guy. So I just kept talking, And finally, I just said everything I thought to say. And I said, do you understand what I'm saying? And he said, yeah, I understand perfectly what you're saying. And he went out and did it. I mean, it was like somebody flipped a switch and the two of them were on the same page. And after the ride, he came up to me and he said, do you train in Aikido? And I said, no, I don't. I didn't really even know what it was. And he said, well, I'm an Aikido instructor, and what you're teaching in your horsemanship is Aikido. And it just so happens that one of the top Aikido masters in the world lives about 45 minutes away from us. And he kept saying, you need to go see him. You need to go work with him. And anyway, that's how, and it turns out that here in town, we live in a town of about 7,000 people. There was a really good, and still is. In fact, I just trained with him last Thursday night. Amazing Aikido instructor. And so I went to him and I've been training with him ever since. And so, and then how we bridged that gap was I could see the implications from the internal aspects of the art and the softness part of it. I mean, it's just crossed over perfectly into horsemanship. And so I started showing people during clinics some of those concepts, and people got more and more interested. And finally, about 16 years ago, we developed Aikido, which is basically Aikido for horsemen, so that you don't have to have any martial arts experience at all. And you can come in and experience what we're talking about.
How do I spell that, Aikido?
AIBADO.
EABO.
AI.
Yeah.
BA.
BA. Yeah.
DO.
Aikido. Do. The D. Aikido. Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. And what's the B and the A standing for?
Aikido is basically what it means, depending on the kanji that you use. It either means a way of being with horses,
okay,
or for the love of the horse.
Interesting.
And so the kanji that we use is for the love of the horse.
Why do you think, despite that man's background in Aikido, that it hadn't occurred to him to blend with the horse's energy in that way?
Because he had been taught something else when it came to horsemanship.
Okay.
He had been following some instructors, some big name instructors, who were basically saying that, that this is how you do it when it comes to horses. And so he never made the connection between the two.
Okay.
Because he had been taught that, it's kind of like what Chrissy was saying earlier, where the work that she was doing, it didn't feel right. And it didn't feel right to this guy, but he doesn't know as much about horses as these other people did. So he was, he didn't rely on his instincts. He just went the other direction.
It's so interesting, the human brain, isn't it?
Isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, we've all done this, but it's always intriguing, how people navigate these things. Chrissy, you do a lot with photography. And how do you use that? It's an intriguing thing to me at the moment, because I use it sometimes with tracking, with getting people to notice stuff about nature, right? Just literally take a picture and let's look at how many species are on there, or what's it of, or what is that leaf, or whatever. I thought I was very original. And then I was doing a podcast about a week ago with an amazing woman called Emma Hutchison, who runs something called Horseback UK up in the Highlands of Scotland, mostly working with trauma. And they do a ton with photography and nature photography for getting people into the present moment. And she's taken it, of course, much, much further than I have. But it's intriguing to me. And I wonder how you are using visual arts to help people with themselves, their horses, and their horse-human organism?
Well, that's very interesting because I had not contemplated sharing it in a clinic situation because we're focused on the horsemanship part of it and also the internal part of it for people. But the way that, I've been taking photographs since I won a camera, one of the very few lotteries I've ever won. I won a little 35 milli camera. This is when film was still being used. And so I've been taking pictures since I was 12. And I personally use it as a way to keep a connection with the creative part of myself. So I don't get into the analytical system part of the brain, which is also very useful, but it's not the whole picture. So I tend to be high anxiety, and my photography practice is to help me reconnect with my creativity in order to lower the anxious response. So as an instructor, I want to live what I'm teaching. That's very important to me, that I don't just tell someone, be calm. I don't say to someone, well, if you did this and this, your anxiety might be a little lower. It's really important to me that if I have something in me that is challenging me, that I find ways to work with it and understand it. And so that's what photography has been for me, is walking my talk, basically. I love the idea of connecting it to how people see the world. Because when you look through a lens, when you have an actual camera where you're looking through a lens, not just a phone, it's a much different way of looking at the world, and you have to make adjustments in order to get what you're seeing in your head to match what comes out on the picture. I think that's really intriguing. I'm thrilled that you're doing that and other people are doing that, because visual arts are engaging
Your
in
perspective
different
taking,
ways.
right? Perspective taking is brain
Yes.
building, right? Yeah.
Yes. Yes. So I use it personally. I haven't thought about extrapolating it out.
I'd be intrigued to see what you did with it if you do extrapolate it out. If you were to take a test case of a clinic and just experiment, I'd be very with yourself and with others in whatever way it's. I'd be very, very interested to see what comes out of what you guys do with that.
That might be a whole different type of clinic format. That might be like a 3-day clinic exploring this aspect of it. That's a really good idea. Thank you, Rupert.
I want 30%. I mean 50. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah. 45.
Okay. Talk to my boss. Yeah. So.
Okay.
If you're a horse nerd, and if you're on this podcast, I'm guessing you are, then you've probably also always wondered a little bit about the old master's system of dressage training. If you go and check out our Helios Harmony program, we outline there step by step exactly how to train your horse from the ground to become the dressage horse of your dreams in a way that absolutely serves the physical, mental, and emotional well-being of the horse and the rider. Intrigued? Like to know more? Go to our website, heliosharmony.com. Check out the free introduction course. Take it from there. The other thing that I know is a really big part of your lives is music. And again, this is so interesting because music, as we know, to get coherence out of an instrument, there has to be structure. I mean, not always, but it sure helps. It's very difficult to shred on a guitar if you're not having got a basis to shred from, and at the same time you can also completely channel the collective unconscious as well. How do you find music informs better horse and humanship in yourselves, and how do you bring that, if you do bring that, into your interactions with the people and horses that come to you? Do you want to kick off with that one, Mark?
Well, for me, everything is connected. So when I'm building guitars, for instance, I will, the finished product begins with just a slab of wood, basically. And the way that you shape the wood and the thickness that you have and the type of bracing you put in the guitar and how you shape the braces and all of that, and you're constantly checking every step of the way, and you never know how this guitar is going to sound until you string it up for the first time. But everything that you do from the beginning of getting a slab of wood to stringing the guitar up, everything is about what is this going to sound like when it's done. And every part that you shape has to fit into another part, and it has to fit pretty exactly in order for it to be the instrument that you want. And so I look at my horsemanship in the same way, that we're building a foundation. And if we skip any part of this, this thing isn't going to play very well, or it may not sound very good. And every step along the way, the guitar maybe doesn't look good when you're building, right? And because, it hasn't been sanded yet, or, we haven't shaped this part, or we didn't get the binding on just right, and we're going to have to maybe take it off and do it again. But the whole point is that in order for this guitar to play well and sound good, every step of the way, we have to be mindful. And so by the time we actually play the guitar, and for me, I'm self-taught, and I actually had a head injury back in the early 1990s, and I ended up having to learn how to play the guitar all over again. And that, among other things, that caused some problems for me. But again, it's about when you're learning how to play, I think the mistake that a lot of people make, and the same thing with horsemanship, is that when you're learning how to play, if you don't hit the right note and you keep going, that wrong note is going to still be in that. That's what you just created, that pathway. You put the wrong note in the pathway. If you get to that note and it's not the right one, and you stop and you put the right note in, and then you go back and play all the way to that note and it's the right note, and then you keep going, then that will go in. So it's exactly the same thing that we want to do with our horsemanship. We want to get it as correct as we can, so that's what's going. So when we're teaching a horse something, we don't necessarily want it to be perfect, but we want it to be pretty close, so that the horse knows that search that they were doing to get to the answer is in the right direction, and then we can build on it. So, horsemanship so often is about looking for the bad that the horse is doing so we can fix it, instead of looking for the good so we can build on it. And so what we're trying to do is find the good in the people and in the horses, so that we can build on it. And then you can make your music, right?
Yeah, it's funny. There's two things that leap to mind. The first thing, what you're saying, looking for what's right. Someone gave me a really great piece of advice about leadership, and they said, catch people doing something right.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, oh my God, yeah, of course. The other thing is, when you're talking about leading up to that note, I'm also self-taught on the guitar. And so I've definitely put those wrong note pathways in. And what I find is that, as you say, you just explained it very well. If you allow yourself to pause, put in that note as an isolated note, regroup, come back to there. You might have to pause again. You might have to pause again several times. So you will be dealing with the frustration of, I can't play the melody, as long as that is one's desire. I can't do the exercise on the horse or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Rather than saying, I'm playing around with the concepts of this exercise on the horse, and up until this point I'm fairly comfortable, then it helps me if I can pause, and I might have to pause quite a few times. But this idea of allowing yourself and the horse to stop I've realized more and more and more the absolute necessity of this, but it wasn't what I was brought up with. And it can be so difficult when you're working with instructors, because the instructor, of course, actually in good faith feels that they have to give you your money's worth and help you get through and achieve that exercise. So maybe it's a clunky shoulders in, or a, as you say, with a lot of tension, whatever it is, it's just got a lot of tension in it. And so, or it breaks down completely, neither of which is what we're actually looking for. But the rider feels, well, I can't pause. I can't advocate for myself to ask for this pause. Maybe I don't even know in my mind that I need that. The horse is just going, well, pauses might be nice, but that's not an option that's ever been on my table. And there's this idea that we must ride through it. We must keep going. And so talk to me a little bit about the value of stopping and regrouping and pausing, because I do think this is something that bears a little bit of conversation. And this idea of sort of letting yourself and the horse off the hook, and perhaps the person you're working with, rather than constantly being on the hook. But that, again, it's not an extreme thing that being off the hook means you abandon the whole thing. No, but we realize that sometimes we have to stop and rest on the way up the mountain. So, Chrissy, talk to us about this. You must encounter this a lot with yourself and with people you're working, particularly as you're self-described as, with anxiety. And as we know, with anxiety often comes a certain adrenaline, and then a desire to kind of rush through, like a horse that's intimidated by jumping will rush the fence to kind of get it over with to some degree. And we have this human response as well in us. So talk to me about the other slow down, the pause, the regroup.
As an instructor, if someone asks me a question, I say, let's say, my horse isn't backing up very well. Okay. So we take a look at that and everything is tight and the horse isn't backing up. The person in their mind has a picture of the horse going backwards, right? Until they're asked to stop. Just back. But that's the goal. And what I see a lot is as people, we are so goal oriented that we want to start with the goal instead of, like you were talking about, there's this piece right here that needs to be in place before I can get to that goal. Matter of fact, there's about 15 or 20 pieces. And the value of the pause is that in teaching the backup, we can look at that horse and rider and say, okay, the very first piece we need is relaxation. It doesn't matter if the feet move. It doesn't matter any of that. But what we're seeing is the person has an idea, let's back up. And then everything in the person tenses. And then the horse tenses behind. Okay, so for that horse and rider, it might be, can we relax as our very first step? The pause comes as a way to tell the horse, yes, I'm looking for relaxation in the movement. Right? So that's the value of the pause. When it comes to people, the value of the pause as an instructor, what I see is if we offer information and let people work through it at their own pace, they're likely to retain it rather than forget it. And as it is in an hour-long lesson, we may only remember 20% on a good day. Yeah. So Mark has this saying, which I love. He said, people don't care how much you know. They just want to know if you can help them. And I told him I'm always so grateful that he doesn't say, they just want to know how much you care, because it's a little too Hallmark for me. But I really like that. It doesn't matter how much we know, how much experience we have. What matters when people come to us for help is that we have something that can help them. And so this person doesn't need to know about the hours I spent studying brain science in order to offer them the one piece of information that will help them make a change. They don't need to know that. They don't need to know the books I've read. All they need is, let's try this, and then I shut up so they can do it. So I'm not constantly bombarding them with information. And when you said that as instructors, we want to give them their money's worth, there's absolutely that part. And if we teach a certain way, they will naturally get what they're coming for. They're not paying for everything I know. They're paying for help for their own challenge. So I always think of pause as it's a gift, really, because we have no pauses in our culture. Everything is 24/7, full on, fast. We have to create the pauses ourselves. And so pausing as an instructor is a practice. And then being able to also offer myself that is another practice. Same principle,
Yeah.
different uses.
In all of our programs, we have a series of guidelines, and one of them is 8, and one of them is time for innovation, which is really pausing. And we really should call it time for myelination, to pause and allow the brain to, as Dr. Peters would say. By the way, listeners, if you haven't listened to the podcast with Dr. Stephen Peters, get your ears, arses onto that, because he's just the most fascinating man, neuroscientist, neurologist, neurosurgeon, and horseman, and autistic. You cannot not listen to this man. He's amazing. But as he would say, those pauses give your brain a chance, those new neurons, to myelinate, to get the fatty tissue a chance to grow around the new connection, to make it stable, not fragile. And this requires a pause. Yeah.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
The thing that also, when you said that I kind of pinged off of too, is that a pause, I think subconsciously, a pause allows us to feel safe. Because it's not the absence of presence, but it's the absence of pressure. So I don't have the pressure of listening to someone tell me the next piece of information, right? So our nervous system, I think, with pauses, this is what I've noticed for myself. I have no scientific basis to base this on, but what I've noticed in myself and with students and horses is that putting a pause in allows for us all to come down, to settle, to get grounded. Speed, unless you're skilled at speed builds in tension and anxiety. Unless you practice that way. That's not always the case. But a lot of times we go fast without knowing what we're doing. And I think that drives up anxiety. So if you have someone, or if you make it a practice in your life to find the pauses, it's an internal practice as well. It's not just for the brain, right? It's also for how we feel inside.
Right, because stress actually drains your tank, right? I mean, it's a neurotoxin with a cortisol, great, but also it takes a vast amount of energy to be both on the gas pedal and on the brake at the same time, and we can't not have that in life. But we probably only have a certain amount of those moments in us. And do you think it's perhaps true that our subconscious knows this? Maybe the horse's subconscious knows this and knows that a depletion of energy, therefore, beyond a certain point, means actual lack of survival. So your point about feeling safe means I will survive. Feeling unsafe means this exercise might kill me, because it's now the equation of the energy that it's taking versus what it might give me back has gone upside down. And perhaps in our subconscious, we know this because we're hunter-gatherers. We know we can only expend a certain amount of energy on the hunt for food before it kills us. Similarly, horses must know this deep down. If you're expending energy to get to water or grazing or whatever, only a certain amount of energy is going to be good in that equation, and beyond that, not good. And then you might be in that risk zone at the end of the winter or something, and you do realize perhaps you might die. So we don't want to tap into that. It's very interesting. Do you feel, Mark, that this softness that you're talking about, and and the foundation, does it really come down to instilling a sense of safety?
Definitely. That's the whole point of all of it is, it's like Chrissy was talking about with, putting the pauses in. One of the things that I've gotten in the habit of doing almost unconsciously with students is I will offer some information, and then I will let them go do it. And if I need to offer more information, I'll ask them to stop so that we can talk about it. And then they can go do their thing. And I might talk to people in the, the auditors and almost completely ignore, I'm watching the rider, but they know I'm talking to the auditors. So that takes the pressure off of them to be able to just focus on what they want to do or how they want to do it. And if I feel like I need to offer more information, I'll ask them to stop again. And, and there's, for me, I don't know that I've ever told anybody that they've done something wrong. And even when somebody will say, I've been doing this wrong all these years, I will say, no, actually, what you've done has gotten you to here. I mean, you've got a lot of skill. This is awesome. It isn't what you want to do right now, but what you've done has gotten you to here to where you can take the next step and do the next thing. So I tried really to help folks think about that there's no judgment about what you've done in the past or, any of that stuff. None of that matters really, so the softness part of it, I think, is all about safety. It's about that. If you don't feel like you're being judged, you can feel pretty safe about what's going on. And I think that's really important. We had a gal last year at one of our clinics, one of our 10-day clinics, and super nice gal and very talented. But she had gotten stuck in a system and was kind of putting a lot of stuff, internal stuff, onto the horse that she was riding. And for 6 days at least, I was trying to explain to her that, I don't know that that's what we got going on here. And I think it was maybe on the 8th day, it finally dawned on me that I needed to be quiet. I'm not hearing what she was saying. So she couldn't hear what I was saying, and I needed to stop talking. And we sat down together, and I just said, okay, can you just tell me what's going on? And I mean, let's start at the beginning. So what's going on? Not the beginning of here, when you got here, but the beginning of your horsemanship, when you first started riding. And she told me the whole story, and I just listened to what she had to say. And by the time we were done, she felt better. And things went well with her horse and her. And that's how the clinic ended for her. And it had nothing to do with me expounding on things that I knew. It had to do with just listening to what she had to say. And she explained to me that nobody has ever taken the time to do that with her. And so she has always thought that she was just a bad student. And people had actually told her she was a bad student. So it's that kind of thing. How you help that person or that horse feel safe doesn't matter. It just matters that they feel better. And, and that's really, for me, that's the most important thing. And then we can do, then whatever you want to do, then we can do it.
The pressure we sometimes feel that we're under, whether we're instructors or facilitators or the person providing the service, let's say, because there's a contract to this, and we all have that little voice, imposter syndrome, and that little voice in our head saying, yeah, but you suck, really, and no matter how much that actually, well, by now actually I sort of do kind of know how to help people with horses with this kind of thing. It's okay. I don't need to feel this, but there it is. We're human. There's that little voice.
A good thing, though.
Go on.
It's a good thing because it keeps you honest.
Keeps you honest, keeps you humble. Sure. Yeah. But it can also dominate and overwhelm. And
if we let
heroin and things. But yeah, treading that line, obviously, but you're right. It serves a purpose for sure. That inner critic. I guess it's just that it's often pathological. The safety has to happen, of course, for the person who is there to receive the thing that you guys have agreed to try to transmit, whether that's an equine assisted thing, whether that's a horse training thing, whether that's a photography thing or a writing thing or an Aikido thing or a music thing. And then there's you, the person who is standing there with that little inner voice. As somebody who suffers from anxiety and therefore can really empathize with that a lot, Chrissy, what do you do to make yourself feel safe? You go out into the judgmental environment of the equine world, and it can be a pretty judgy place, and you can be so good. I mean, I know people who are so good at what they do and they still get judged. It can feel very unsafe. And in fact, I just want to add to that before you answer. That was, I think, the thing about the Warwick Schiller Journey on Summit in San Antonio that I met you guys at. I think it was the only time I've gone into an equine environment that was, sort of bring a whole bunch of people together, to talk about stuff, where I did not observe the judging and the factionalism and the negativity, and I was like, fuck, sorry, excuse my French, but like that was a first. It's like, I was like, what's different about this? It's like, no one's being a dick. This right. is, in fact, the opposite. In fact, people are actually trying to see each other's points of view, and they're trying to sort of be kind to each other. This is like unprecedented. And I was a bit worried because I was bringing Rowan into that. And I always worry a little bit when I bring my son in. Is it a safe place for him emotionally? And it was. And you guys are obviously a big part of that. How do you make yourself feel safe, Chrissy?
Putting me on the spot. I don't feel safe.
Okay. Feel safe now.
Feel safe now.
Indeed.
Yeah, that's an ongoing process.
Do you have some go-to things?
Gratitude.
Oh, good one.
Is a big one. Yeah. The other thing that I really, really keep in mind is that I think Maya Angelou said, when you know better, you'll do better.
Okay.
And so my whole journey through horses and life has been, as I have known more and understood more, I'm not really sure about the word better because I'm not sure what we're trying to be better than, but we can improve.
Yeah, sure.
I like the idea of becoming a fully integrated self, right? We have all the emotions. There's no good or bad. We have responses and we have all this stuff coming in. We have all this stuff coming out, but we're fully human, meaning we make mistakes. We say the wrong thing. We sometimes, despite our best intentions, we mess up. And so the thing that is my lifeboat when I have days when I have helped a horse and a person, and then I go back and I'm like, I don't think I made a dent, is to remember that and I don't mean this in a trite way, but I am doing my best. I am doing what I know to do. And that's all I can do. And you have to excuse me, that's my dog. The other thing is we really have to cut ourselves some slack. I don't know whose standard we're trying to reach. But I have to live with myself, as we all have to live with ourselves. And I want the rooms in here to be pleasant. I mean, even if there's a room where there's anger, or if there's room where there's sorrow, or if all the rooms are what they are. And in order to do that, I have to cut myself some slack. I have to look at a horse and rider and go, I don't have the skill set to help yet. Maybe in 5 years I will, because I'm doing things now that I couldn't have done 5 years ago. So I have to trust that I will improve, and I have to really focus on the fact that I am doing my best.
I like your gratitude thing.
Yeah.
When I remember to, I'm not foolproof in this, but when I remember to, I do thank the people that come in front of me for trusting me and just bringing this to me. And I'm grateful. I am grateful. I am actually grateful. And then sometimes we'll do a gratitude warm up together.
Yeah.
Before the thing, or I'll just say, let's think of what are you grateful for right now? And then they'll say something and I'll say, okay, well, I'm grateful for blah, blah, blah right now. And it can be something related or unrelated. And I always find that brings me into a sense of, just purely selfishly, into a sense of relaxation, as you were saying about relaxation earlier. And I also am high anxiety. I confront very well because I grew up in that particular school system in the UK, which trains you to do it. But I'm a quivering little bunny, inside, and I'm always dying of fear in just about every situation. I think it's part of my genetic, Litvak Jews, always wondering where the next pogrom's going to come from,
Yeah.
Keep an eye on the exit.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the gratitude is, if I'm having a stretch, whether it's at work or in my life. I had a wreck in 2014 and I had to use a cane and I had to kind of relearn how to walk. And so my go-to gratitude is I'm so thankful I can walk.
Yes, no kidding.
If I get wound up on what I perceive as I'm doing or not doing, that's a story. And stories are awesome unless they keep us wounded, unless they keep us down, unless they keep us fearful. Yeah, I love stories, but they have a place. And so, it's always about just checking, what story am I telling myself right now? Okay, the story I'm telling myself is I'm not a good enough horse person to help this horse and rider with this issue. Okay, well, doesn't sound very true, How do you know that you helped or not? They didn't tell you, they didn't look at you and say, you suck, our brains are so interesting because we are story making machines. And I think
it's the nature of our species. We are the storytelling age.
Yeah. And so I think it's really wonderful to employ that in a way, finding ways that are healthy to do it.
Yeah.
And gratitude seems to be I bring that back in because if I can pause and bring in the gratitude.
I was just thinking that gratitude brings you the pause. Yeah.
Then the story washes away because when you're grateful for something, there is no story about that. I'm grateful I can walk, and I can walk, right? I'm grateful for the blue sky today. For whatever it is.
It's a reset, isn't it? It's a constant. Every time
it is a reset.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And I think in all these jobs, one has to give out a lot of energy. One can get depleted. I have a kid that comes out to me. I struggle. I don't want him to know that, but I do. And so I try to design the play date so that it's in a place where I feel as good as possible. So we always meet by a particular creek where I am kind of into the bird life and I'm into the sound of the water. And I know he will be too. And he's a perfectly nice kid. It's nothing to do with him at all. What triggers in me is down to me. Certainly not his problem. And it's a very interesting exercise in, okay, well then what are the tools that I can use here to make myself feel safe? And I guess you're right, because what happens is with each of those gratitude things, I get a chance to pause and have a breather in something which I find internally, emotionally quite difficult, which doesn't just get me through, it allows me to deliver energy, which is necessary. And not have that, oh my God, the energy's depleting, I'm going to end up on the wrong side of that. Even if that's complete fantasy, your brain doesn't know the difference between fantasy and reality, as we know. It's fascinating to me the number of tools that you guys use without necessarily being explicit about the fact that you're using these tools. To look at you guys from the outside and see what you bring in from the martial arts, what you bring in from the arts, what you bring in from the humanities, what you bring in from neuroscience and so on. one last thing, because we're sort of just passing the 2-hour mark here, and I do want people to also know how to get in contact with you, your books, come and study with you, and all that good stuff to get to. But you did mention story, and you guys are both writers. Do you bring story into what you do? Do you encourage people to journal, for example, through the courses of what you do? Do you consciously bring story in certain ways? And if so, how? Do you want to kick off with that one, Mark?
Yeah, I mean, I've been a storyteller all my life. My family, I grew up in amongst a whole bunch of storytellers. My whole family, my aunts and my uncles and my grandfather and my dad, and it was always about stories, and which is why when I wrote the first book, I wanted it to be a story book. I didn't want it to be a how-to book. And you can learn from stories, and you can learn from listening to stories. And so oftentimes, whether it's in the dojo or whether we're in the arena talking with somebody, I will often say, yeah, that happened to me, that thing that's going on with you. I can remember I had a time when, and I'll tell them, a relatable story about something that happened to me, or when I was working with a horse, or, something that just went horribly wrong when, I thought I was thinking that I had it going on, and then everything went sideways, and, but you recover from it, and then you don't do it again,
Or you'd be like me and endlessly repeat the same mistake.
Yeah, or you could do that too. I mean, I think it's whatever you're comfortable with, right? But yeah, I think oftentimes at least it's been my experience, when somebody will tell me something that happened to them, and something similar had happened to me, or vice versa, you just don't feel quite as alone.
Yeah.
Like I'm the only person who ever made that mistake, or did that thing. And man, I just, and here we are 10 years later, and I still feel horrible about it. Yeah, I did that too. And I know just how you feel. And so for me, especially being an instructor, I think sometimes we, as instructors, and you kind of hinted at it too, is that we inadvertently might put ourselves at one level and have the student at another level. And for me, it's always been, I don't need the person to know how much I know. I just need them to know that I might know the one piece that they don't know that will help them move past this spot. I might have that one piece of the puzzle, and that's all really they need to know. And it goes back to what Chrissy was talking about, where for me, it's not about how much I know, it's can I help this person? Most of the time you just need one piece, but it needs to be the right piece at the right time.
Mm. And
if you're throwing out a ton of information and everything that you know, it's going to get lost in there, Yeah. So for me, that's what this is all about. How do we keep folks safe, and how do we keep the horses safe, and can we develop some softness, and can we feel better than we did when we came in?
Can we feel better than we did when we came in? Yeah, I love that. Chrissy's story.
Love stories. Yeah, I much the same as Mark. I have 30 years worth of stories with horses, and there are some stories that illustrate a point. You can tell a story and you're telling it from your point of view. So the beautiful thing about stories is we get to see through the eyes of whoever we read, right? Or whoever we're listening to. And so if most people we see have experience with a handful of horses. They have many years with a small amount of horses. And Mark and I are very lucky because we have a lot of years and a lot of horses, which means a lot of stories because we have a lot of experiences. So yeah, I prefer to relate something to a story rather than giving the impression that I'm here, that I know all this stuff and you've come to me, and that, those, again, it's not me. It's not me to think that because I've had these experiences, I'm better than or know more. We're just farther down the trail, right? We're all on the same trail. It's just I've maybe reached mile marker 20 and they're at 18. So I can say, oh, to get from 18 to 20, you have to, here's some things that are helpful. So when I think it comes to story, it kind of takes the pressure off of, here's what I know, right? And instead says, here's what I experienced. This is what happened. And then the other person go, oh, I've had that happen too. And now you have a connection.
Safety
right?
again. Yeah.
Safety. Yeah. Safety in numbers. I mean, we're herd animals.
Absolutely. Yeah. And if we feel we're on our own with this, that's the hyenas might eat me feeling.
Yeah.
I just really liked what you said. You've said 3 times now. Experiences rather than experience. And it's so interesting, the emotional difference between those two things. You say, I've got 30 years of experiences. It means, 30 years of stuff happening to me. If you say I have 30 years of experience, it's like, I have 30 years of experience. It's a very different vibe, isn't it? And
yeah, thank you for pointing that out.
You did that very spontaneously,
and
I was like, oh gosh, I need to make sure I'm putting it in those terms too, because one made me feel safe, and the other would not have.
Yeah, but 30. Yeah,
I want
it's
to know
I
that
have
you've got
30
that
years. Yeah, I have 30 years of experience. That's so like
it's instant
it's
hierarchy,
not
isn't
connecting.
it? Yeah.
It's not. Yeah, it's not connecting.
No, it's not.
But 30 years of experience is, other people can say, well, I have 30 years of experiences too. And that there's the connection. Thank you, Rupert. That was.
Well, thank you
for pointing that out.
Using that and bringing that to my attention, because that's definitely actually a tool which I think, I don't know if I'm using that tool well enough, but now you brought my attention to it. I'm certainly going to try to. So, story heals, as you say, unless they're sort of triggering amygdala-y, social media-y, the wrong kinds of stories. But stories do heal. They seem to be medicine. You guys are medicine people, I think, when it comes to the work you do. I genuinely think you are. If people want to come and connect with you, what do they do? How do they find you? What are the courses you offer? And then please tell them about your books. So start with how they find you and what are the courses you offer. Either of you just jump in, please.
I will jump in with some of the logistic stuff, and then Mark can add on to it. So you can go to markrashid.com. We have, once you're there, you can sign up for our newsletter. We have a little newsletter, goes out once a month. We have an online classroom. You can also find out how to register by going to Mark's website. And again, that's markrashid.com.
Mark with a K.
We have Mark with a K, yes. And then I have a website as well. It's chrissymcdonald.com. And then both of us have
McDonald, not MacDonald.
Well, it was MacDonald in 1660, and somehow it became McDonald in 1690. But that's Scottish history. You probably don't want to. That's not.
I might know because my clan is Clan Macpherson. So yeah, we could go down a rabbit hole. Oh yes, yeah.
Yeah, that's a whole different rabbit hole.
Yeah.
But yes, it's Chrissy, CRISSI McDonald McDonald.com.
Okay.
And all my books are there. You can look at them, and then both Mark and I's books are at whatever retailers you like to buy from. I always like to promote bookshop.org because it supports local bookstores.
That's cool. We talked about one of Mark's titles, Consider the Horse. There are others. Is there a particular title you would draw people's attention to from your books, Chrissy?
I have 2 horse books. They're different focuses. So I'm just going to point out both of them. The first one I wrote is called Continuing the Ride, Rebuilding Confidence from the Ground Up.
Okay.
And that has to do with what I did to get back in the saddle in a healthy way after my wreck in 2014.
Got it.
So because we hear from a lot of people how they're anxious and they don't have the confidence they used to.
Sure.
And then the other one is called Getting Along with Horses and Evolution in Horsemanship. And that explores some of the ideas that we've been talking about here.
Wonderful. Mark.
I think it's Mark's turn now.
Books, please.
I don't know how many books I have out, actually.
16.
I've got 16 books out. And so, yeah, and you can find those on the website. One thing I do want to mention, just because it's a thing. So the first book is called Considering the Horse. So it's not consider.
Considering.
It's considering. And here's why. So when we were getting ready to put the title on the book, I wanted to call it Considering the Horse. And the publisher wanted to call it Consider the Horse.
Ah.
And I felt really strongly that Consider the Horse was telling people what to do. Whereas considering is an active, it's an active thing.
It's a conversation rather than a telling. Yeah.
And indeed, yeah. So, but there is actually, again, there's a story behind why that title is Considering instead of Consider. So, I mean, we went round and round for about a month on that, the difference between consider and considering with the publisher. And I couldn't let it go. I was fanatical about it. And so that's why it's Considering the Horse.
Well done for holding your ground.
Yeah. And that was my first book too, that they didn't even want to publish. So I felt like, yeah, we did okay with it. But yeah, all the books are on the website. Our music is on the website. And we've got 3 or 4 CDs out, which people don't buy anymore, but they're there. And yeah, all of our courses are on there. We do 5-day clinics. We do all these at Happy Dog Ranch in Sedalia, Colorado, just south of Denver. So we do 5-day clinics. We do 3-day Aikido and riding in the afternoon. And then Aikido is in the morning, riding is in the afternoon. And then we do 10-day clinics. There are intensives. We do those June, August, September. Our 5 days are in May and October. And then we do some courses with Jim Masterson and Steve Peters in July.
Fantastic.
And they're all at the same place. An amazing place.
Happy Dog Ranch.
Happy Dog Ranch, yeah.
We
need to get you there. Have you ever been there?
I'd love to get there. I'd love to. I'm often in Denver. Yeah. I know Colorado Springs too. So,
yeah. Well, it's right between. It's in between.
Okay. Yeah, and I know it. I know. At least I know the sign on the highway. Yeah. Love to. Can people come? Do you have to bring your horse? Can you come without a horse?
You can come without a horse.
Okay.
Yeah. You have to do everything on foot, but no, we got plenty of horses there.
Very cool.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Happy Dog Ranch, 5-day and 10-day intensives. Brilliant. MarkRashid.com. Chrissy McDonald.com.
McDonald, yes.
McDonald. I would like to do this again. There are some things I'd like to go further into. Also, the work you do with Masters and Method and the things that you've alluded to. I feel we sort of barely scratched the surface. So would you come? Would you guys come on again?
I'd love to.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'd love to.
Thank you.
It's been my absolute pleasure. I learned a lot. I'm going to say experiences. I'm not going to say experience. I feel safer when I say it too.
Yeah.
Because if I say experience, I'm like I'm making myself vulnerable, aren't I? It's like, what if my experience is not good enough? But my experiences, well, they are what they are. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you have lots of years of experiences too.
1 or 2.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Too. Yeah,
Mhm.
Yeah. It's who you are.
indeed. Indeed. All right, my friends, I'm going to hit that dreaded button to stop record. But thank you so much, and we will see you on the next one.
Thank you,
Rupert.
Rupert.
I hope you enjoyed today's conversation as much as I did. If you like what we're doing here, please do like, subscribe, tell a friend. It so helps us to get this valuable work done and the message of equine assisted stuff out there. And if you're interested in more conversations, you might want to check out our Live Free, Ride Free podcast. And if you'd like to support the podcasts, please go to rupertisaacson.com and click on the Patreon link. If you're a professional in the equine assisted field or are considering a career in the equine assisted field, you might want to check out our 3 certification programs: Horseboy Method, Movement Method, and Taquine Equine Integration. You can find all of those over on newtrailslearning.com. And finally, if you want to check out our cool rock and roll themed merch, back on rupertisaacson.com, please click on shop. You'll find all kinds of fun goodies there. And if you're looking for a way to spend time until the next podcast, you might want to consider reading the books that kicked all this off: The Horseboy, The Long Ride Home, and The Healing Land. So see you next time on Equine Assisted World. Join us for the adventure.